It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
It is indeed Rico Brogna, episode 603. And this is a weird Rico Brogna because I have grown accustomed, I think you have grown accustomed to losing free agents, to being pissed off, to being angry at losing Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso. Today on the Rico Brogna, we actually respond to a signing as the New York Mets do sign Jorge Polanco to a 2-year, $40 million contract. My first response when I got the news was, how does he fit? That was my first response. And I said to my dad, because I was with him at the time, I said, I guess he's going to play some first base, but I don't think he's played a lot of first base. So I quickly take my phone out and confirm he does not play first base. So I figured, all right, he'll DH a lot. It seems, the more you give it thought, that that's going to be his role. Like, could he play second base if Marcus Semien gets hurt? Sure. Can he play third base if Brett Beatty flames out? Sure. I doubt he goes back to shortstop, a position he used to play, but moved off of 3 years ago. So I think Jorge Polanco is a good player. And I think when you look at his offensive numbers throughout his career and you look at his offensive numbers last year, he improves this Met lineup. I'm looking for the right words because he improves a Met lineup that got significantly worse in the last 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Like, yes, Jorge Polanco being added is better today than the structure of the Met lineup 24 hours ago. No question. But when you look at what has been lost, Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso, I don't necessarily feel the Met lineup is anywhere close to what it was last year, and we know it needs to be better. But I think what we need to do, and certainly at the end of the offseason, we can look at, were they better off doing this? Were they better off doing that? Of course. But I think in the midst of this offseason, where the final product is clearly not there, I think we just have to react to, yes, they got better. Yes, the Mets need, in my opinion, to add 3 bats, 2 to 3 bats, likely 3, and now they've added 1. And Jorge Polanco is a good, solid bat. I think the fit is the part that we're kind of wrapping our head around. And it's funny, when they signed Jorge Polanco, and I had that reaction, I went to my dad and I said, I think I said something about Jorge Polanco in the Rico Brogna about a month ago when we were doing the previews of free agency, when we were doing the position player free agency. So in just a little bit, out of fairness, we will listen back to what I said a month ago. And it's funny, it's pretty consistent with what I'm saying, which is I don't understand the fit. And I think the thing that's going to bother a lot of Met fans, and I'm slightly annoyed by in talking about this about David Stearns, is that all we've heard about is run prevention. Run prevention, run prevention, run prevention. And as we wrap our head around the fact that Pete Alonso is not here, one of the things that we rationalize is, okay, we're going to miss that big bat, but they're going to get better defensively at first base. You cannot say that about a guy who has not played first base. You can speculate it because he's a really good athlete. You can look at Bryce Harper and William Contreras and say, see, here are guys who weren't first basemen. They converted and became pretty good defensively, which I think both Contreras and Harper are. But there is zero evidence other than speculation that Jorge Polanco is going to be a good defensive first baseman. So that's the part where you kind of get angry at David Stearns and you say, wait a second, hold on a second. You're going to play a guy at first base, assuming that's their vision. You're going to play a guy at first base who's never played there and tell us we care about run prevention. This is a big upgrade over Pete Alonso. That's a tough pill to swallow. And that was another thought that went through my head on this Saturday afternoon. We are recording this Rico Brogna late Saturday night, so I had about 8 or 9 hours to think about this. Driving all day with my wife, running errands. That's why the Rico didn't pop out within 5 minutes. Believe it or not, Hoff and I do have lives, and we try to be good husbands. We may fail at that a lot, but we do try. So I had a big chunk of time to digest it and think about all the different things that annoy me and the things I like. Like, I like Jorge Polanco. I don't want this to be, and it won't be, for the next 45 minutes, me bashing him. He's a good ball player. He's a guy who last year, and I think if you watch the postseason, this is probably what will jump out at you. He hit 2 home runs in a playoff game against Tarek Skubal. He got the game-winning hit in the 15th inning to send the Mariners to the ALCS. I mean, the man is coming off of an incredibly clutch postseason. And you look at his career, he's a good ball player. But I think the fit part is where I scratch my head. And so I'm going to speculate, and I'm also going to tell you what I would do. My speculation is that he is going to play a lot of first base. My hope is he plays a lot of DH. That's my hope. My hope is the Mets look at Jorge Polanco, a guy who has been injured throughout his entire major league career, and I'll go through it real quick in a minute. And I hope that the Mets say, you know what? We have been a sieve at designated hitter since the DH came to the National League. So let's put this really solid veteran and say you're the DH. But if need be, you can play a position. Like, you're our DH, but hey, no big deal. If Marcus Semien gets hurt, you're our second baseman. You're our DH, but hey, don't worry. If Brett Beatty falls on his face or he gets hurt, you can play third base. And we'll play you a little bit at first base, depending on the other moves we make. That's what I would want. Like, as I have thought about this for 9 hours, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that Jorge Polanco is this useful ball player who is mostly a designated hitter. Now, let me go quickly through all of his injuries, and that's a part of why I want him to be DH. I think the other reason is what I just talked about at first base, that if you are going to sell me on Pete Alonso, we don't want to make him an offer more than 3 years. They never even made him an offer, so God knows, maybe they didn't want to go more than 2 years. And we're going to hear so much about defense. The idea that you are going to try a guy who has not played the position. He has played 1 game at first base in his career, and I guess Baseball Reference doesn't even qualify him as completing like an inning. So he's barely played. He hasn't played first base. That's the way we'll phrase it. He hasn't played it. He's taking grounders over there. So have I. He's not a first baseman. So it would be very difficult to sell us that he's the first baseman when you told us so much about run prevention and defense. But here's how I talk myself into liking this. He is a good hitter. We'll go over the numbers in a second. But he is a guy throughout his major league career that's had physical issues. In 2019 and 2020, he had multiple ankle surgeries. That was a constant. When he was with the Mariners in 2022, or I guess still with Minnesota in 2022, he had lower back tightness. He had knee inflammation and actually had left knee patellar tendon surgery during the offseason of 24 into 25, which may have worked because this past season was a really good offensive year, which we're about to get into. He had multiple hamstring issues during the 2024 season, in which he spent a couple of IL stints. So this is a laundry list of injuries, which is why when you look at his major league career, one of the things that's kind of missing is that he doesn't play all the time. He doesn't post, as the kids like to say. One of the great compliments of Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso, you could say whatever you want about them as players, they play. Jorge Polanco has had 2 seasons in his career that I would deem posting seasons, where you play every day. 2019 and 2021. That was a long time ago. In 2018, that was the year I think he got suspended because he does have a PED suspension on his resume. Long time ago. So that wasn't an injury that kept him out half the season. That was a PED suspension. In 2022, he played 104 games because of those injuries I just talked about. In 2023, he missed half the season. He played 80 games. In 2024, his first year with Seattle, he played 118 games. That's missing a big chunk of time. That's missing 2 months. And then last year, which was a statistically really good year, which again, we'll get to in a few minutes, he played 138 games. It's almost a full season, but it's not a full season. So when you look at Polanco's resume, especially as he goes into his age 32, 33 season, he's 32, he'll be 33 in July, it is absolutely fair to say he's a nice ball player. Is he going to stay healthy? Hence why I really want to push this DH thing. It's not just the defense. It's not just the, hey, don't lie to me, David Stearns. Don't tell me how important run prevention is and then have a project at first base. It's not just that. It's the health. Like, I said this about Brandon Nimmo before they dealt him. If you have a guy that's banged up, if you have a guy that fights through injuries, if you have a guy that has multiple IL stints like Polanco or like Marte last year, one of the best ways to kind of get the most out of him is to not ask him to play the field. It doesn't mean you aren't going to eliminate those injuries. Injuries happen. But I would feel a lot better about this move if, and I don't know if anyone's going to say it because David Stearns isn't going to meet the media every 5 seconds. And there's also a lot of other moves that can potentially be made. But I would like this move if you just said Evany's the DH. I'd say good. I'd say great. That actually makes a lot of sense. A switch hitting DH hits effectively from both sides. The Mets have had terrible DHs for years. He's injury prone, but hey, I'm going to DH him, something he's done throughout his career, but hasn't been a full-time DH. He's DH'd before. Everyone has, but he hasn't been a full-time DH. I'm going to keep him healthy, and don't worry about first base. We're still working on it. I would like this move. I think I would say, hey, I think this is a nice little solid move. Not knowing what the next move is, which of course none of us do, but that's kind of my issue with this. Like, if he's the DH, I like it. If he's going to spend 130 games learning first base, and we're looking at some kind of first place platoon, and then he shifts over to DH, I don't love it as much. I really don't. Now, let me get to the numbers. These are the positive numbers on why I think that offensively this is a good addition. Him and Brandon Nimmo have very interesting careers. I'm going to start with last year, and I get they play different positions, but hey, Marcus Semien was traded for Brandon Nimmo. They played different positions. I'm looking at who is Polanco replacing in this lineup. And to me, he's kind of replacing Brandon Nimmo. That's sort of how I view it. And maybe I view it that way because they're similar offensive players. Last year, Brandon Nimmo played 155 games. Jorge Polanco played 138. So you see a 17-game difference. Nimmo's WAR was 2.9. Polanco's was 2.6. So relatively close. Both below average defensive players. I would actually say Nimmo was rated higher as a left fielder than Polanco was as a second baseman. Nimmo hit 25 home runs. Polanco hit 26 home runs. So basically the same. Nimmo drove in 92. Polanco drove in 78. Nimmo hit 262. Polanco hit 265. Nimmo was on base at a 324 clip. Polanco 326. Look at this. I mean, we are talking statistical carbon copies in terms of what they did last year. The slug was a lot higher for Polanco. A lot higher, maybe too strong. I'll just give you the numbers. You can decide. Polanco's slug was 495. Nimmo's was 436. The on base, did I do the on base already? I'll say it again. 326 for Polanco, 324 for Nimmo. And the OPS, 821 for Polanco, 760 for Nimmo. Polanco had a better offensive season. He did. It was close. It was relatively close, but he was a better offensive player, and those were numbers in 17 less games. So I look at this and say, and by the way, if you go through the entire career, I did the splits on their entire career, it's actually going to be sort of similar as well. The difference, and this is a huge difference, and it's not just the whole defensive thing, the difference is the reliability. Brandon Nimmo turned himself into one of the most reliable players in terms of playing every single day. And like we just went over, Jorge Polanco doesn't have that. But listen to these career numbers. They have almost played the same amount of games because Polanco got a 2-year head start on his major league career. Came up 2 years earlier. But Polanco's played in 1,088 games, Nimmo 1,066. So almost the same amount of games when I give you the rest of their numbers. Polanco, 263 career hitter, Nimmo, 262. So essentially the same. On base is a huge edge for Nimmo because, as we all remember, earlier in Nimmo's career, he was an on-base merchant, and that those numbers have gone down over the years. But overall, 364 for Nimmo, 330 for Polanco. The slugging is a slight edge for Polanco, 442 to 438. And then the OPS, slight edge for Nimmo, 802 to 771. Very, very similar career numbers. So it wasn't just last year where the numbers are similar. If you look at their entire career, they're similar offensive players. And what's also weird about Polanco, and not getting to watch him every day is tough to kind of read this. He has varied greatly in terms of being a patient hitter and not being a patient hitter, which again is similar to Nimmo because early in Brandon's career, I mean, he was walking at a crazy clip, and those numbers have dipped the last couple of years. Polanco started off as a aggressive hitter, and then a few years ago, literally walked 15% of the time, which is a monstrous number. And then those numbers started to dip to where last year he was pretty average, similar to Nimmo, walking at about an 8% clip. So I think what we can learn from this is that they are very similar players. The edge is Polanco is a switch hitter, so you love that kind of versatility. The advantage for Nimmo is reliability, like we talked about. The edge for Polanco would be position versatility because of the fact that he can play second base, he can play third base. He's going to play first base as much as we may not like it. But honestly, both players probably should have come into 2026 if they were on the Mets in the role of mostly being a designated hitter. And that's how I hope the Mets use him. That is honestly my hope for Jorge Polanco. Now, before we continue, let's go back a month. Let's go back into the archives of the Rico Brogna. We were doing deep dives on free agents. We were doing deep dives on starting pitchers, and we were doing deep dives on position player free agents. And so we started off with the top. We were going through the middle, and eventually we got to Jorge Polanco. So here's what I said about Polanco when it was brought up. And remember the context of where we are. Nimmo is still on the team. Alonso is a free agent. So we went into this offseason not knowing what moves were going to be made. Here is what I said about Jorge Polanco. Another guy from the Seattle Mariners who's interesting is Jorge Polanco. Polanco is a switch hitter, and I kind of look at his view or his defense and say, okay, where does he fit? Because he has basically become an all-the-time second baseman. He played shortstop early in his career, not that that would help around here, but he's a second baseman. So where does he fit? And the answer is not really. I mean, I think Polanco could only fit in the arise role I mentioned earlier, where he's a guy who's capable of hitting 20 to 25 home runs. He's a guy capable of hitting 260, 265, give you a mid-70s OPS, like a relatively productive player. You bring him in as your second baseman until one of the young players takes the job, and then he becomes a most of the time designated hitter. That's how I would view a Jorge Polanco. He's 32 years old. He'll be 33 in the middle of July. Don't see the greatest fit with him. Yeah. So based on that, now that second base is filled, I guess I stand by what I said. He's the DH. That's it. That's his role on the New York Mets.
Dude, that is hilarious. You said it twice. I don't see a fit. That's the guy they go for.
Well, but it was also before they let Alonso go and before they acquired a second baseman, which actually made him less of a fit. I think that this team is so desperate for offense, and they need to add 3 bats. This is one of them. And look, I went through the numbers. I think if we're going to be fair here and we're going to take all the emotion out, we're going to put our hatred for the Alonso thing aside, he is a good offensive player. He is. He's Brandon Nimmo, and Brandon Nimmo is a good offensive player. It's more, how do you use him? Do you agree with me that DH would be the ideal way. And I'm talking most of the time DH. I'm talking 125 games at DH with, hey, depending on injuries, depending on slumps, depending on other things, a handful of games in the infield.
I'm going to say something, and I know now I've said it many times before, but this time I mean it. Jorge Polanco could be the best DH the Mets have ever had.
Well, I mean, by accident.
Yeah. No, listen, it's funny because you're right. I mean, he's identical to Nimmo. It's a little different approach. He's a little different of a player, but yeah, I mean, the numbers kind of fit exactly. That could work out. That makes a ton of sense to make him an everyday DH guy.
I'm going to read some of the emails, and obviously everyone's opinion on this move is going to be different. We're going to come from different angles on this. I think if it was presented, and I know that I think it was John Heyman or Mike Puma, one of the reporters said, oh, their plan is first base DH. So that's their plan, which, by the way, plans can change because we are still early enough in the offseason where depending on players or trades or free agent signings, it can all change. But I think when we view it with first base, there's a negative connotation to it because of the fact he hasn't played the position and because of the fact he's replacing Pete Alonso. I think if it was simply stated, he is the designated hitter, there would be more of a positive view on a signing like Polanco because A, they haven't had a DH, as your joke suggests, and B, that's where he makes sense because the idea of having a most of the time DH who can play positions, like isn't someone, no offense to Kyle Schwarber, he's obviously an incredible offensive player, which would have enhanced this lineup, but Kyle Schwarber is the DH, period. Like there's no wiggle room on that. A guy like Polanco has enough experience all over the diamond where, yeah, he's the DH, but he doesn't have to be depending on what happens over the course of the season. You know, Simeon not being healthy, he is 35 years old, a possibility. Brett Beatty falling on his face, we would not like to see that. It's a possibility. And then, like, first base possibly being something that grows depending on how he looks defensively and depending on the rest of the roster. But I wouldn't want to go into the season relying on that because he's not a first baseman. And after being told run prevention, it's insulting to hear that. So I think if it's DH, the view of this move would be more positive, which is how I would view it.
Right. But here's the thing, too, is even if he is like the majority of the time DH or the guy that's going to get the most opportunities at DH, he's still going to be a utility player. Like he is going to give, whether it's Simeon, whether it's Beatty, whether it's whomever, days off at their position. So he's going to be that guy. He's going to be a utility role, which is kind of something that we've always liked. That is totally fine.
Like he provides good versatility. And I'd argue a hell of a lot more versatility on the infield than Jeff McNeil because right now, Jeff McNeil's an outfielder. Like, let's just call it like it is. He is an outfielder until the Mets trade him, which I think we mostly assume. They need outfielders. Jeff McNeil doesn't play third base. He doesn't. And much like Polanco learning first base, McNeil hasn't played a lot of first base. And unlike Polanco, who has played shortstop, not that any of us would want to see him over there at this point in his career, but he has played 400 games at shortstop. McNeil's not a shortstop. So in terms of the infield, and obviously being a better offensive player, at least last season and the last couple of years, he's just a major upgrade over a guy like Jeff McNeil. And if he gets most of the time at DH, he's a major upgrade over what they've had at DH. In terms of the contract, which we haven't mentioned, it's a 2-year, $40 million deal. Here's the way I'm going to view this. It's a short-term deal. So is $20 million a lot for Jorge Polanco? I mean, isn't that kind of what Brandon Nimmo made? I hate to bring it all back to Brandon Nimmo, but it's a shorter version of Brandon Nimmo's contract. It's only a 2-year deal, and it's tough to hate it, honestly. Like, I don't hate the contract. It's short term. There's not a lot of risk attached to it. It's the prime of his career, assuming he's still in it, and based on last year's production, he is. So the contract's fine. It's really about where you're going to play him. Let me read some of your emails just to get a sense of the Met fans' reaction on this. The RicoB@gmail.com. And I am still going through all the emails from the Diaz and Alonso departures because we got overwhelmed. So if you emailed, we will hopefully get to them on one of our mailbag editions of the Rico. The emotion of Diaz and Alonso is not something that's going to go away, even if we're talking about Jorge Polanco today. Ephraim writes, I see the vision. Losing Diaz stings, but I'm really starting to see the vision for this team. Far more athletic and better run preventers, proven winners. My dream guy to sign is Bo Bichette, but at this point, we would have to play him at DH, so it seems unlikely. I'd imagine Stearns would acquire 2 proven outfielders instead, and I'm fine with that. Get me a proven semi-ace type pitcher, 1 more reliable reliever, and I think that's a good offseason. Yeah, you can definitely forget Bo Bichette. The infield feels very set outside of first base. Daniel writes, David Stearns' plan is pretty clear. I emailed the Rico B explaining how David Stearns' plan is pretty clear, and we're just refusing to believe it. After this Jorge Polanco signing, I think I just confirmed my stance. David Stearns is only interested in signing veteran players to 1 or 2 year deals. It provides flexibility and gives opportunities for his farm system to churn out major league players each season who will play on their rookie deals for 6 to 7 years and then leave to play somewhere else. He will not use Steve Cohen's checkbook to build this team, but rather to supplement it on the margins. Unless you're under 30 and a generational talent like Juan Soto or Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Stearns has no interest. Instead of wasting our time thinking about the possibilities of signing guys like Cody Bellinger, Framber Valdez, or any of the Japanese players who will require long-term commitments, we should be focusing on the trade market and free agent vets who can be had on 1 to 2 year deals. We can debate whether that's the right approach, but Stearns' actions speak louder than words, and it's time we open our eyes. I think that Daniel is partially right. Like, we talked about this a few days ago, that when it came to Alonso, there was a hard line in the sand. And when it comes to most starting pitchers not named Yamamoto, there's a hard line in the sand. And it feels like with a lot of position players not named Juan Soto, there's a hard line in the sand. All you've got to do is look at now the 3 off seasons of David Stearns. Where I'm not fully convinced, Daniel, is on one more position player. Like, they've been linked to Cody Bellinger for a while. And I don't know if they're going to go wild and crazy, not assuming that they are, but I do think, based on their interest in Bellinger and knowing that Bellinger is looking at minimum at a 5-year contract. He may get 7 years at this point, and I'm not saying the Mets are going to dance with that, but would they be willing to go on a 5-year deal for Cody Bellinger? I kind of think they would. Now, I'm just guessing. Daniel's guessing the other way. I guess we'll find out based on the moves. But I do agree overall that there is a stinginess, may not be the right word. There is a bar for which free agents they are going to go heavy for. Look at the track record. We have 3 years now of off-season data, or at least 2.5 seasons of off-season data. They have gone short-term on every starting pitcher they've added, and reportedly, there has only been one monster long-term offer, and that was for Yamamoto. And when it comes to position players, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's Soto. And that's it in terms of even offering a long-term deal to. I'm trying to remember if there's anybody else. And remember, we're talking 2.5 years. We're not talking about Billy Epler. We're talking about David Stearns. So that is something that doesn't come as a surprise, Daniel, because we talked about it a few Ricos ago, and I disagreed. I think that sometimes you got to get uncomfortable for certain players. Now, is there anyone in this free agent market he's going to be willing to go uncomfortable for? And the only guy I think he would do it for is Bellinger, but I don't think it would be 6 or 7 years. I think if the Mets end up with Cody Bellinger, you're probably looking at a 5-year contract.
The one question I have, which many people have asked me, and I'm deflecting, but I'll ask you, is anything with these short-term contracts because of the CBA that's being that and the potential strike that's going to happen? Is that part of it?
What? Why? Because they're thinking, like, first of all, Polanco signed for 2 years. Marcus Semien signed for 3 years. That goes past the lockout, right? So there would be a year and 2 years of paying money to guys in the post-lockout world. So knowing that, Why do you ask that question? You're not the only one, but why do you ask that?
Well, because you can't, rather than give that big long-term commitment, unlike Soto, they did that to Soto, so they've done this before, but to other players, see how the CBA kind of falls out.
So it's impossible for me to say no way. Now, they've publicly denied it. A lot of GMs have. But the reason I'm still going to lean on the previous comment is we have last year and the year before to kind of back up the fact that David Stearns is going to be picky at which free agents he wants to go big and strong after. Like that. So I kind of lean more towards that than being afraid of what the new CBA is going to look like. But it could be. I mean, we have no idea. I don't know what Steve Cohen thinks the new CBA is going to look like. Like, I know the owners are probably going to ask for a salary cap. I have been pretty firm that will never happen. They could ask for it all day. It's never going to happen. So does Steve Cohen, in his mind, he's a smart guy, think, hey, we're going to come out of this lockout with a hard cap? Maybe. But I still lean on this is an approach. This, because they didn't want to get Pete Alonso a long-term deal last year. So I think it's just an approach. Now, I look at this lineup right now. They got major holes in the outfield. Major holes in the outfield. So I still think they need to add a real first baseman, but they also need to add at the minimum one major league outfielder, because I'm up for a young kid getting an opportunity. Like the idea, and I don't even think this is that bad, and I'm going to throw Morabito into this as well, because remember, he was added to the 40-man roster this year, so the Mets wouldn't lose him in the Rule 5 draft. He's the center fielder who played in Double-A last year and put up pretty good numbers. He also stole a ton of bases, and he's a right-hand hitter, Nick Morabito. So if you told me the Mets get a real left fielder, let's say it is Cody Bellinger, and you went into camp with the veteran Tyrone Taylor, with the young Nick Morabito, who has not played above Double-A, but nevertheless, he's 22 years old. He had a good year at Double-A. He hit in the Arizona Fall League. We're going to give him an opportunity. And Carson Bench and Jet Williams. You threw the three kids and Tyrone Taylor and said, open competition. Let's go. I'm not against that. But I would feel better about it if there was a really solid other outfielder in play. So you're not, looking at Juan Soto and then a battle for two outfield spots. So that's why I go back and forth on, is it two bats or is it three bats? And I think it's also the quality of the bat that you add. I think Polanco is a good addition in terms of improving this lineup, but playing him at first base is the thing that makes me queasy. Curtis writes, Evan, what a wild week in New York sports. I'm pleased to see any move that improves the team, and Polanco does that, though I think it's more likely he'll play third base and Beatty will be moved than he plays first. Another wait-and-see move from David Stearns. Sickening to see Pete Alonso in an O's jersey. Yeah, it was. I have no ill will towards Pete Alonso. I think Pete, in my eyes, is Jacob deGrom, like an all-time great Met, that I am mad at the Mets for not being more aggressive in retaining. Now, I think in deGrom's case, there's many more Met fans that disagree with me and say, hey, how could you have offered him 5 years? He's always hurt, blah, blah, blah. That's okay. That's a debate for another Rico. So I think seeing Alonso in an O's jersey was more, we let this happen again, than being angry at Pete. Pete's going to get an incredibly big standing ovation when he comes back in the middle of September. Edwin Diaz, on the other hand, seeing him in a Dodger jersey was sickening, but I think there's a lot of blame towards him. And even his comments of, and it was very weird because he starts by saying it was a hard decision and it ends by saying the Dodgers are a great organization. They win. It's an easy decision. So I don't know if it was hard or easy, but Edwin Diaz's return is going to come with fire. It's going to come with anger. Now, as far as Curtis's point about Polanco playing third base, I think that what the Mets are in right now, because they are talking trade, and I don't think anyone's off limits outside of Nolan McLean and Juan Soto, and John Heyman has reported as such, that McLean is the only guy who is untouchable. So if no one's an untouchable, if Brett Beatty's name came up in a trade, whether it's a move for Tarek Skubal, whether it's the discussions with San Diego, which we'll get into in a minute. Could they trade Brett Beatty? Of course. I mean, absolutely. So I think sometimes moves like this can change based on what happens in the offseason. If Brett Beatty gets traded, are we living in a world in which Jorge Polanco is playing a lot of third base? Sure, I couldn't rule that out. But I think right now, first you add a bat to your lineup that you know improves the lineup. I mean, clearly it does. They added a guy with 25 home runs last year. He had an 800 OPS. Assuming he can play and stay healthy, they have a better lineup today than they did 12 hours ago. Not saying much, but it's true. And when you have a lot of versatility, it allows all these different possibilities, these balls in the air moves to happen, and you can pivot, whether it's Polanco playing third base or Polanco becoming the all-the-time DH. I think Marcus Semien is pretty safe. I don't see the Mets trading him, mainly because they just acquired him. Now, let's get to the Padre rumors. It was very interesting. John Heyman, who does have information despite his arson judge screw-up from years ago, tweeted out earlier on Saturday, Jonah Tong is highly coveted in trade talks. And while the Mets value him highly, they are listening. Nolan McLean is viewed as off limits, and Carson Bench is close to that. The Mets are stacked with good MLB-ready prospects. Williams, Sproat too. They need proven pitchers, plus an outfield bat as well. That also then brought up the fact that the San Diego Padres and the New York Mets have had discussions in which names like Mason Miller are discussed, Ramon Laureano is discussed, Adrian Morejon is discussed, Nick Pavetta's name has been brought up. That was a report from Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal about the Mets and the Padres talking, and they were very quick to say Lindor and Tatis are not a part of the discussions. So despite the wants of us to get Tatis and the wants of Padre fans to get Lindor, these Met-Padre discussions, according to them, do not involve those two players. So here are my opinions on this. Number one, I am not interested in giving up Jonah Tong unless I'm getting a really appealing package. Can Nick Pivetta help the New York Mets? Absolutely. Am I trading Jonah Tong for him? No. Can Ramon Laureano help the New York Mets in the outfield? Absolutely. He's been a different player for about a year plus. Going back to when he got cut by the Guardians, he got picked up by Atlanta, and then last year bounced around before ending up in San Diego. It's a trade deadline acquisition. Laureano's numbers for about a year plus have been awesome. Really productive player. He's a corner outfielder. His defensive metrics are not great. He has a wonderful arm, but his range isn't very good. But yeah, he's an outfielder and he breathes and he's productive. Sure, the Mets could use him. Am I giving up Jonah Tong in a deal for Ramon Laureano? Get the hell out of here. Adrian Morejon is one of, especially the last 2 years, and I love consistency from relievers. For the last 2 years, in terms of appearances and effectiveness, one of the better lefty arms in baseball. Would I love Adrian Morejon to be in the Met bullpen, now to have three lefties alongside A.J. Minter and Brooks Raley? Let's go. But not for Jonah Tong. The guy I'm intrigued by is Mason Miller. So let me just throw this out there. Based on the reporting of Ken Rosenthal and Will Salmon that Mason Miller's name has come up, and based on the reporting that John Heyman says the Mets are listening on Jonah Tong, Pete Hoffman, answer me this. Riddle me this. And for the live YouTube audience, go into the chat, because I haven't figured out how to see the chat, and I want their answers on this. It's a very simple question. Would you trade Jonah Tong straight up for Mason Miller? I'm not saying it's out there or it's going to happen, but based on Heyman saying Mets are listening on Tong, the reports on Mets and Padres talking about various names, including Mason Miller, if it was a straight up swap of a 27-year-old electric reliever in Mason Miller, who I guess the Mets could always convert to starter since the Padres are thinking about it, for Jonah Tong. A, would you do it? And then give me what the chat is saying about a Miller for Tong deal. And I'll tell you my opinion.
If it's just straight up Mason Miller for Jonah Tong, 1,000%.
No brainer?
Mason Miller is somebody that I've highly regarded forever. I thought the Yankees should have traded for him last year at the trade deadline. The Mets, I think, should have gone for him. I mean, that is a guy that is a high leverage pitcher who, yes, he's had his arm issues. I think he's good. I think, and listen, if you go through it, if he does have an arm issue, so be it. I mean, what's his contract like? He's got a few years, right?
4 more years of team control.
Let's go all day long.
Okay.
All right. And now as far as the commenters, Miller all day. Do it.
So now, you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid it's not a fair trade now.
Oh, it's not. It's not even close.
It's not even. So how much do the Mets have to give up to get Mason Miller then? I mean, again, let's just put these pieces together. Lindor is not being talked about despite that conversation on San Diego Sports Talk Radio, right? So it's not Lindor and it's not Tatis. We're going to put them aside. If the Mets are talking about Mason Miller and I guess talking about Jonah Tong, what would it be? Would it be Jonah Tong and Jet Williams? Would it be Tong plus? And what would the plus have to look like to get, at the end of the day, a relief pitcher? I mean, you're trading Tim Lincecum, a potential Tim Lincecum, for a potential Rob Nen. I mean, I would think that the guy getting Lincecum is getting better in this trade.
It's different, though, because Mason Miller's a proven stud. He's got 4 years of control. Like it's not like a 1 year deal. It's not like a 1 year rental.
But Jonah Tong has 6 years of control. He's barely pitched in the major leagues.
Did you see him versus Jacob deGrom?
Come on. That's not fair.
I'm just saying. Did you see that?
He is a top 50 prospect in this sport.
Okay.
I'm just look.
Do they all hit?
They don't all hit, but then you're talking about a relief. You know what I'm confused about? And I'm being honest. I'm taking a step back saying, oh, wow, okay, it's not a fair trade. I've clearly got this wrong. If every single Met fan in the YouTube chat says yes, the best trades are the ones we're uncomfortable about. 1,000%. Like, that's why I knew that whole Mark Vientos, Jason Dominguez fake trade really hit, because there was so many no's from both sides. And then I heard yeses from both sides. And I'm like, okay, it's an uncomfortable trade. Uncomfortable trades are the ones that are fair. It's the reality. Everyone saying yes makes me take a step back. But my baseball logic, like if the Mets were not in the specific position they're in, with having a lot of youth in their rotation, like a lot of top prospects, whether we're talking about Scott, Sproat, McClain, like they're loaded with pitching. And the bullpen is a major question going into this season. To me, I wouldn't make this trade if all things are equal. Like if it was a top 50 starting pitching prospect for a 27-year-old reliever who throws 102 miles an hour, who's been in the sport for 3-4 years and has been good, but it's kind of scary when you throw that hard. When's he going to get hurt? I would say, oh God, I'm not taking the reliever. I'm taking the stud pitching prospect, the starting pitching prospect. The reason I'm willing to do it is because of the Mets situation. So maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe a top 50 prospect is not enough for Mason Miller, who last year with the A's pitched to a 3.7 ERA, a 2.9 FIP, so a little bit unlucky. And then went to San Diego and gave up 2 earned runs in 23 1/3 innings, a 0.77 ERA.
I mean, I just see that. You're right. Like, what's the need for the Mets? But on the other hand, too, does a prospect right now this season, if you're in a win now mode, which I'm not really sure if the Mets are in a win now mode, is a prospect starting pitcher more valuable than someone in the 8th, 9th inning?
No, I would make this trade. My point is, if all things were equal, I would prefer to have the stud, young, top pitching prospect, starting pitching prospect, versus the relief pitcher who's now been in the majors for 3 years and is really good, but he's a relief pitcher. Like, to me, that's my opinion. Like, if it was all things were equal, I would want Tong. But because of the Mets situation, I'd be intrigued. So I guess what I wonder about with these Padre Met discussions is what an overall trade would look like. If Miller for Tong isn't fair enough, the Mets would have to go Miller and Jet Williams in a trade for Mason Williams. Oh my God, I'm screwing
Mason
up.
Miller?
Mason Miller. I got the Jet Williams, Mason. I'm combining them. Jet Miller and Mason Williams.
I mean, what if they called for Brett Beatty and Jonathan.
For Mason Miller?
Yeah.
Honestly, now I don't love it because now I'm giving up my starting third baseman now, and I'm open to trading Brett Beatty. I would need more back.
You got Jorge.
By the way, where's
Polanco.
Beatty playing in San Diego? They're stuck with that Manny Machado albatross for the next 10 years.
Yeah, but Beatty could play second base. He could play first base. He can go around the diamond.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds as if maybe a trade like this would have to be Tong plus and then Miller plus. So maybe it's an expanded kind of deal. But in terms of the other guys, like they all serve as fits on this team. Nick Pivetta is really interesting. We talked about him in free agency a year ago. He was a reliable starting pitcher, other than the times Boston used him out of the bullpen and he didn't start. But he basically threw 140 innings every single year, right? So he was out there taking the baseball whenever needed, but he was pitching to a mid-4 ERA. And I remember saying about him last year in free agency, I like his reliability, but what he did last year in San Diego was amazing. Like he really turned it up a notch and had a wonderful season. He pitched to a 2.87 ERA, ended up getting Cy Young votes, and he threw 181 innings. But look at his last 5 years before that. The year before that in Boston, he made 27 starts, 145 innings, 4.14 ERA. The year before that, 142 innings, 4.04 ERA. The year before that, 180 innings, 4.56 ERA. So he was a low to mid-4 guy, but reliable. So the question we'd have to kind of guess on Pivetta is, are you trading for the 32-year-old who had a Cy Young caliber season, or the 32-year-old, 33-year-old soon to be, just average innings eater? And as far as Pivetta's contract's concerned, he has an opt-out after this season. So if he has another big year, it's a one-year deal. He's got 2 more years after this if he decides to opt in on it. But if he has a big year, especially looking at the starting pitching market, he's gone. Adrian Morajan, the left-handed reliever we talked about briefly, is a free agent at the end of the year. Same thing with Ramon Laureano. So keep that in mind. And that's a part of why, if I'm trading Jonathan and it is San Diego, do not talk to me unless Mason Miller's in the trade. I don't want to talk about it. You give me all those other guys, and they're all useful players, but they all sound like rentals. They all sound like one-year deals. And I know there's an appeal to that when you're signing a free agent, and that's fine. There is less appeal to that when you're trading a top pitching prospect, because then I'm not really drawn in by it. But clearly the Mets are talking. They're conversing. Luis Robert Jr., we talked about him on the last Rico, is another name that is out there. I'm intrigued by Robert Jr., but I'm not giving you anything. That would be my conversations with Chicago. I'll take the money. I'll even pay it off. But I'm not giving you top prospects. I'm not against trading Jonathan. I'm not against trading a top prospect. It's got to be in the right deal. It's got to be for the right player or players in this case. So the San Diego stuff is worthy of keeping an eye on. So overall, my feelings today as a Met fan is I'm still pissed off. I'm still, devastated that Pete Alonso isn't walking through that door. But they are starting to pick up the pieces by at least improving this lineup by bringing in Jorge Polanco. We'll have another Rico Brogna coming up after football on Sunday night on YouTube or Monday morning for you to download wherever you download your podcasts. We will begin to focus on David Stearns' history of making trades. And I think that is a worthy podcast to go through. It was a request from a Rico listener. But even more so, with all these trade rumors heating up, let's go through his resume as a trader with the New York Mets. And one last thing, and I believe this with all my heart. During the offseason over the last few years, we have something called the Rico rewatchables. We pick an old Met game, we say, hey, watch it, and then on this date, we're going to do a whole Rico Brogna reacting to the game as if we watched it live. Pull some audio clips, give you our thoughts about it, talk about it. And I put a poll out on social media a couple of weeks ago, throwing a few Met games out there. And it hit me this morning. There is only one game. Well, we're going to watch 2 games. The 9/11 Mike Piazza return game, but that's for later in the offseason. So we'll have 2 Rico rewatchables. But in terms of this other game, we need this. It is important. So we have made a decision on the Rico rewatchable. It is not going to be the Mike Scioscia game. It is not going to be anything depressing. In fact, we need something uplifting. This offseason has been one of the worst in Met fan histories. So we need something to pump us up. And we need something that I am convinced most of this audience, because it's a young audience, you haven't even watched the full game. You know the story, you know the inning, but you need to experience all of it. And so this holiday season, when you're with your family and you're like, hey, time to put in that Rico rewatchable, Evan Hoff are going to do a podcast on that in early January. It is time that we all rewatch or watch for the first time the greatest, let me think of the right word I want to use. The greatest moment in the history of the New York Mets occurred during this game. 1986 World Series Game 6. We need it. Because in an offseason in which we've been beaten down and half of us are like, we're going to suck, this is going to be a horrible season, we need a life lesson. And what better life lesson to never give up than Game 6 of the 1986 World Series? For those that have seen it, good for you. You're going to rewatch it. And for those that are too young and have only heard the stories, we do it. Game 6 of the 1986 World Series is needed. It's needed for me, it's needed for Hoff, and it's needed for all of you. A couple of years ago, if you're a loyal Rico listener, we did Game 7 of the 86 World Series because I always say it's the most underrated game. It was a Game 7. They were trailing. We need to respect it. Well, we all respect Game 6, but now we're going to rewatch it. So the Rico Rewatchable Part 1 will be Game 6 of the 1986 World Series, and we will pod about it early in 2026. And it's the anniversary, right? Yeah, so there you go. It all makes sense. We appreciate you downloading and listening to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.